So I'm going to start with Sophia and ask you to talk more about how the over-incarceration of people of color that has been addressed now several times tonight affects the workforce.
Thank you, and Jess, for the question, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate in tonight's discussion. When I think about the impact of mass incarceration on the workforce, particularly in Black and brown communities, I think about what I experience when I walk out of my front door. And who do I see going to work, or more accurately, not going to work? And what is happening in front of the corner store, in front of the liquor store, all day long, during the day when people we expect would be going to work. And I think about the number of people that I went to high school with who kind of disappeared from my community, and the common language was they went away, or they went upstate, and that did not mean that they went to SUNY Binghamton. And how literally a whole group of people were disappeared out of the community, which means that they were not contributing to the economic viability of that community in so many different ways. They weren't buying or purchasing in the local stores. They were not paying rent in the community or paying mortgages. They weren't buying gasoline in a local gas station. All of the things that we spend money on in our day-to-day lives in our neighborhoods, that group of people is not there to do. So that's perpetuating this ongoing driving of poverty. And I would speak for a moment, ask on my own experience as a criminal defense lawyer. The overwhelming majority of my clients never got past the 9th grade. So when Jeremy speaks about this intersection of high school dropout and the criminal justice system, I used to see it every single day. It got to the point where I stopped asking my clients how far they'd gone in school unless they could tell me that they actually got past the 9th grade. That was a big point to argue in a bail argument. But the last thing that I wanted to say is I want to contrast that experience that I described when I come out of my front door to an experience that I had a few years ago. I've done a lot of work studying the criminal justice system in Cuba. And so I was up one morning getting ready to go to a number of different meetings. And I paused for a moment as I was looking at everybody hustling and bustling, going to work. And I kept thinking, there's something really different about what I'm looking at. But I couldn't, you know how you kind of have that moment where you're just frozen in time? And I kept trying to figure, what is this that's so different? It wasn't because of the horrible exhaust coming out of the back of the buses. And finally, what hit me was what was so different was the population that I was looking at was just peppered with Black and brown men going to work and taking babies to daycare and totally participating in what's accepted there as the norm. And I realized how used to the non-norm I had gotten living in Brooklyn. That my community had just been robbed of these same people that I was seeing here in Havana who were clearly integrating the community, and I had gotten really used to the non-integration of Black and brown men in my community.
Great, thank you, Sophia. For I think another perspective on this same issue, I'd like to turn to Glenn and ask you. You know, you spent 6 years in New York prisons before doing the work you do now. You take us back to that time after you got out and what it was like for you to try to find employment as a formerly incarcerated person.
Sure, thanks. It's funny, when I first sat down, I introduced myself to Stephen, and he said, I think we know each other. And I kind of jokingly said under my breath, maybe it was at a grand jury. And then I heard you say you were like a judge, and I was like, oh damn, that was a bad joke, because I might have really been at a grand jury. So thanks for the opportunity. Gosh. So first of all, I'm not sure this is Wall Street. There's way too many people of color in front of me for this to be Wall Street. Bring your white colleagues when you come next time, please. I think Wall Street has some responsibility here, and I think in the end, a bit of the joke is actually on Wall Street, if you will. Part of the responsibility piece, I mean, I can go on and on about the role corporate America has played in the proliferation of prisons and incarceration and so on, because I think where we've ended up partially is at the intersection of backlash to the civil rights era, but also jobless ghettos. And I think Wall Street plays some responsibility in those jobless ghettos. But also prisons have become the economic stimulus package for rural communities where corporate America pulled out of years ago to send jobs across seas. And that is a critical part of this conversation, right? It's not just about right and wrong, it's also about the fact that, as our state Senate leader said a few years ago before he got indicted himself, prisons are economic engines, and that's the truth, not just here in New York, but all across the country, and it makes it even more difficult to dismantle the system that we've created. So I think of two things, two stories. One is my own story, exiting prison. I come out, I earned a 2-year liberal arts degree while I was in prison, served 6 years while I was inside, spent the time as productive as possible. Visited about 40 different employers when I got out. Definitely very motivated, like most people are when they exit the criminal justice system. I would argue at least everyone I knew exiting didn't say, oh yeah, I want to get out and go right back, you know. They wanted to get out, they wanted to find a job, they wanted to do the right thing, they wanted to take care of their families, most people, and was turned down outright by, I'd say, 30 to 35 of these employers. As soon as they saw the criminal record on the application, no. And this is a state with a clear anti-discrimination statute for job seekers with criminal records. It's been on the books for over 40 years at this point. And I remember a couple of employers actually offering me the job, and then by the time the application got back to their HR department, there was a no. So they weren't able to hire me, even if the frontline person who interviewed me was very interested, wanted to hire me. So I ended up getting a job at a law firm, sitting at the front desk, answering the phones, making $16,000 a year, even though I owed about $100,000 a year, $100,000 in fines, fees, restitution, and child support at the time. But it was a law firm where there were public interest lawyers who've been doing this work for a really long time, took me under their wing, and really taught me how to do policy advocacy work. And you know, the reason I say the joke is on Wall Street, because think of all those employers who like just turned me down outright based solely on that box on the application that says this person has a felony, because suddenly my entire identity became that experience, as opposed to everything else I bring to the table. And so for people in the room who don't know me, and I see some faces I don't recognize, ultimately I ended up being the senior vice president at one of the largest nonprofits here in New York, $23 million budget, 212 people on staff, running development, communications, and advocacy. And you know, some people might say, well, Glenn, you know, you're the exception. But the truth is, I always say, if you think I'm the exception, first of all, look at my rap sheet, and you might question that. But the other thing is, I was exposed to exceptional opportunities. So I had the chance to go to college while I was on the inside that rarely exists. And I had an employer who gave me an opportunity, even if it was sitting at the front desk, answering the phone, making 16 grand a year. And I just think of how many employees missed out on that opportunity. I'm not sure if I wanted to be selling sunglasses today, but you know, the point is that all those employees turned me down without digging deeper to find out what else I brought to the table. The other story I want to tell, and I'll tell it briefly, is being in a cell in a prison in upstate New York, and when you travel from one facility to another in New York, they put you on these buses and you stop at like these really scary looking maximum correctional facilities, and there's like rows of cells, 60 long, and they just put you in there, and you're in there with one or two people who you don't know. This was in the 90s, 2000s, when the cells were double bunk, triple bunk. And I'm in there with this guy named Arthur, and he has an addiction issue, and he's in there under Rockefeller drug laws. And he had about 16 years in on a 25-year bid. And I started getting sick in the cell. It's easy to catch a cold in the cell because the windows are open, it's freezing in the cell, and you don't really have anything with you because you're traveling, and they send your stuff on a different bus. And he sees I'm getting ill. This guy doesn't know me. He only met me a few hours earlier. And he said, I'm gonna make you a cup of tea. And I'm like, somebody get me the hell out of this cell, because this guy's lost his mind. And then he takes a plastic bottle and he fills it with water, and he takes a string and he ties it to the light fixture, and he takes a roll of toilet tissue and he rolls it really tightly, and he lights it, and the bottle hovers over the flame, it starts spinning, and the bottle shrinks, and the water in the bottle begins to boil, and he takes it off the string, he takes a tea bag out of his lapel of his inmate outfit, and he puts it in and he hands me a cup of tea. And I always tell that story, not just because it's a true story, but because that sort of talent exists in our prisons. That sort of human capacity exists, and we extinguish it. And we just define people by that one moment or by those multiple moments when they've done something wrong. And I just think that when I think of why Wall Street should care, I mean, what sort of country are we where 60 million people can end up with a criminal record on file? I mean, in the United Kingdom, you only have 65,000 people in the entire population. We have criminalized what is the equivalent of the entire population of the United Kingdom. That's why Wall Street should care.
Thank you, Glenn. Nick, Bill earlier was speaking about the imminent shift in our demographics. It's underway right now. Can you talk about how the changing demographics of this country are going to interact with the current mass incarceration state?
I can. And I would say that at the outset, just a quick reference to the title of this that Jesse and I were emailing yesterday, and it was a particularly cranky day for me, and I said, Wall Street care about this? Come on, Street doesn't care about this. And then I had to admit a few notes into the thread that perhaps I was taking it too literally. But I immediately, when I looked at the description or the title of this talk, I went right back to my studies of corporate law, and I thought about shareholder value, and I thought about quarterly reports, and I thought about this, as Jeremy has set up very effectively, which is really a long war that needs to be fought, as something that I really am not sure that the street cares about, but I certainly hope that people who work on the street, for all the reasons that Jeremy described, do care about it deeply. I want to talk a little bit about why I think the street should care but maybe doesn't, and sort of an economic impact, not in today's terms, but as it relates to the demographic trends that are underway in this country. We saw it all in the 2008 and 2012 election, and sort of the rise of a new coalition. But right now, demographically, we have a barbell. We have people who are over 65 who are about 80% white, and then we have children who are under 10 who are majority black and brown. And we will, by 2042, become a majority minority country, so we will be majority Latino, black, and Asian. And in workforce terms, in 2010, I believe the workforce was 27% black and Latino, and in 2050 it'll be 42% black and Latino. And so that just puts into terms when I won't repeat the statistics that we've heard about the disparities in the system, but if you think about that continuing trend, about 1 in 3 black boys born today spending time in prison, or 1 in 6 Latino boys spending time in prison, and you think about prison or jail and about the effect on their earnings and the effect on their stickiness within the labor market, and then what it means for us as a country when all of us are waiting for our Social Security checks and other things to come in, and we're looking for a tax base to continue to support us. That trajectory is very clear. And I know a number of people in the room, certainly my colleagues or my trustee Roger, have heard me talk about this before, but I really try to make a religion out of repeating it over and over again, because this took 40 years to build, and it's going to take a number of decades to address. And we have to keep our eye on the long game. So as much as we talk about, as Jeremy said, a sense of bipartisan consensus, and an opening and a degree of interest in these issues, and can even ask the question about whether there's a tipping point or not, we have to be thinking about the long war and what's at stake. In the exact same way as the Times editorial remarked about climate, and if you think about climate change and the goals that have been set for reducing carbon emissions, arguably we need to do something very similar here. be very clear about the goals, again, not just for justice reasons, but for reasons of economy and national prosperity. And I think in fact that there actually, that there is a way forward. And my argument really is that we need to be attending to mass incarceration and reducing mass incarceration, but with a particular focus on addressing matters of racial injustice and disparity because of the statistics that I just set out below, or a moment ago. And that's a political argument. Jeremy talked at great length about the need to tackle policies that we have put into place, but we will win this only in state houses and only when elected leaders, whether it's governors or legislators or mayors, who control local systems and have an electorate that responds to them, are pushed to do so. And it's a coalition, and it's black and brown, because most of the growth in this country's majority-minority population is Latino. And we often talk about these justice issues as being most profoundly experienced by African Americans, and they are, in fact. The evidence supports that, but I think that the way forward it's a coalition way forward. And I'll give you two examples of why I think this matters, and it relates to politics. And it's funny to even hear myself talk about this as the executive director of VERA, because we really don't work in the political realm. But one is, just look at Rand Paul, and look at what Rand Paul is trying to do. Now, he's trying to create a new Republican electorate, and he is out on the stump, and he is in New Hampshire, and he is in Iowa, and he is talking about the need to address mass incarceration, and he is trying to attract the voters who care about that. And he is trying to build a coalition unlike any other Republican coalition that has been built. And he's not doing it just because it's a hunch. He's doing it because he knows that the numbers are there and that he can persuade people. And so there's a political argument. And the second thing I would say, as a piece of evidence, is a bit of work that VERA was involved in over the course of last year, which does not relate to criminal justice, but it certainly relates to a matter of justice, which is that VERA, along with the Bronx Defenders and Brooklyn Defenders and Legal Aid and a number of other organizations, make the road by working and walking.
Working might be more appropriate for this room, actually.
But that's probably true. And a number of other organizations banded together and persuaded the city council to invest $5 million in city money to provide legal representation to New Yorkers who are in detention proceedings. Every indigent New Yorker in deportation proceedings. So at risk of being deported. The deportation system, the immigration system, is a federal system. On some level, the city should have no interest in it, but it does have an interest in it because that's because that is electoral power. That is the city council seeing that it mattered to people and seeing that it mattered to the families of those 900 or so people who go through Varick Street and have an opportunity to be represented and get relief, and it was worth $5 million. So I think that there is something that we have here, and that this is a long road forward. This is something certainly that Glenn and Sophia and I and Jeremy and Stephen aren't going to solve, but it's a big long war, and I think it's largely political, and we've got our work to do in that context.